This is The Neutral Position, hosted by Nick Palmisano, bringing honesty and reason back into conversation. Here's your host, Nick Palmisano.
Unpleasant or repulsive, especially in appearance. Adjective. The word is ugly. No, we're not trying to describe your mom or that terrible spring break decision you made back in the day. We're talking about the most heinous, eye-bending, gag-inducing dog chew on the planet. We're talking about ugly chews. To you and me, ugly chews are nothing to look at. You see, when you take cowhide, clean it by hand, and sun cure it with no chemicals, it doesn't look like a cute dog bone or rawhide, but it also doesn't sit in your dog's stomach forever or cause digestion issues. So while we see a hairy mess that we don't want to touch in any way, shape, or form, your dog, the natural predator that he or she is, yes, even Mitzi the toy poodle has some wolf DNA in there. That dog just sees gorgeous, delicious, healthy nature. So when you're at the pet store scanning the aisle or you're online ordering the next tasty morsel for your canine companion to gnaw on, are you buying that cute bone or that rubber toy for you or for your dog? Because in your dog's world, that pretty, chemical-filled, tied in an adorable bow treat is a 6 out of 10. Tops. It's fine, it'll do, but it doesn't inspire. Why? Because to your dog, it's not natural at all. It's foreign. It's manufactured. It's a frozen dinner when you really want a perfectly cooked steak. In short, it's just not ugly enough. So if you want to give your dog the experience of a lifetime while Dreamweaver plays and the world moves in glorious slow motion, then get your dog an Ugly Chew at uglychews.com. That's uglychews.com. Hey guys, this is Nick Palmisano. Welcome to The Neutral Position. Today is a first. We have our first judge. And not only our first judge, but a member of the North Carolina Supreme Court, Justice Phil Berger. Thank you so much for being on. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Nick, thank you so much for having me on today. It's a pleasure to be with you. And so I'm just a guy from small town North Carolina who happened to find himself on the Supreme Court.
I don't think that's the way it works.
Well,
I don't think it's like, I fell into a hole. Oh my God, I'm a Supreme Court justice. This is crazy.
Yeah, I went to UNC-Wilmington and from there went to law school, graduated from Wake Forest, and settled in a small community with the family law firm. My goal always was to go home and work with my father and my brother. Mm-hmm. Was able to do that for a short period of time, and then my dad had some other interests and pursuits that he was involved in. And opportunities sort of presented themselves. Ran for district attorney in this small community and was successful, and then progressed up through the court system as first an administrative law judge, judge on the Court of Appeals, and now judge with the Supreme Court.
I mean, that's a pretty awesome journey. So you come from a family of attorneys. Did you always expect that you were going to be an attorney?
No, my goal was to be a high school history coach and history teacher and baseball coach. And that was sort of my path until about my senior year in college. And then it just sort of, hey, I think I might have a talent for this. So I started applying to law schools, and that was not a pleasant experience. I ended up getting rejected by just about every law school I applied to. So I had to take some steps, do some work, improve on some things, and eventually got accepted at a law school up in Michigan. So my wife and I get married, and about 3 or 4 weeks later, we take off from North Carolina to move to Michigan.
That's not an easy transition. Michigan is a cold place.
Yeah, much different from North Carolina, that's for sure.
Talk a little bit about, and I don't want to call it failure, but talk a little bit about the setback of expecting to get into law school and not getting into law school. Mentally, where are you there?
Well, so it's sort of discouraging, I guess is the best way to put it. I'd sort of put my eggs in that I'm going to be a teacher and a coach, and had not really prepared for an alternative. But I thought with some of my scores and my grades that getting into law school wouldn't be a difficulty, but it turns out it was. And
Why was it? What do you think was the reason it was difficult?
well, so my LSAT scores were not what they wanted, and my grades in undergrad were pretty good, but the LSAT score just didn't set me apart, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of young people miss out on or don't get focused on is your competition, no matter where you are, tend to have you all look the same on paper.
Absolutely.
Right. So what do you do to set yourself apart? And unfortunately, during undergrad, I hadn't done a lot to set myself apart. So that's why that transition period between graduating and starting law school was so important for me. Is I was able to take some steps to improve not only what they saw on paper, but my ability to be successful.
So, you're a youth coach, and I want to get into that, but you just touched on something that I kind of want to bring up. There is a lot of pressure on kids. I think more pressure than when we were kids by a wide margin to essentially have it all planned out at the age of like 15. It's like you have to get good grades. You have to do honors classes. You have to get a good SAT or ACT or whatever score. You have to get into one of these 12 schools that, mom and dad or the community says are the best schools. Et cetera, et cetera. It's almost like a 15 to 20 year roadmap that kids are being fed. I find it interesting and not at all, not unique actually, that plan wasn't perfectly smooth for you, but yet here you are excelling. And so I want to maybe get your opinion, as a youth coach to kids that are on a path, whatever that path is. They're going to hit speed bumps and how you deal with that. So if you could talk a little bit about, comparing your journey, but like really talking about, in those moments, how you rally.
Yeah. So one of the things I try to impress upon my players and law students, we have a healthy internship program as well, is that you are going to face some sort of adversity in your life. And whether it's the death of a loved one at an unexpected time, or a roadblock, as you mentioned, that comes up in your path on what you see as your career journey. At some point, you've got to have the discipline to overcome it. You are going to face that setback, and the question is, how do you respond? And there are a number of people who just have not faced adversity, or when they do, they're permitted to sort of wallow in that discouragement, and they don't take the steps necessary to propel themselves to a better future. Now, for me, was that law school? Maybe, maybe not. I could have used that as an excuse to perhaps fall back on positions that that would not have brought out the best in me. But I think we all have that sort of internal drive. We know that there are steps that we need to take to improve our path or our course or our position, and at some point you've got to trust yourself to do that. There is a better future, there is a different path, but you've got to have the courage to take it. And bringing that back to me, my wife and I could have stayed in North Carolina and had a pretty good life doing whatever at that point in time, but the courage to move away after being married a couple of weeks and go to an environment where we knew no one, and then be disciplined about how you go about reaching your goals.
You talked a couple times, you've mentioned the term wallow. So I think this is something that's important to you, and I'm sure that you impress upon your athletes. Talk about what that means, the danger of wallowing.
Yeah, so you get caught in your head, right? And I think, at least for me personally, and what I've observed in other people, is it's a form of selfishness, right? Some sort of self-centered attitude that the world sort of owes you something, and that it's up to others to sort of set you free of this trap that you're in, or this.
Yeah, if only someone would give me a chance. If only they appreciated me. If only. It's dangerous.
Yeah, and so what's your focus, right? Is it an internal locus of control, right? I have control over my my own destiny and the steps I have to take, or is it an external locus of control that other people can sort of either commiserate with me or allow me to stay? And we tend to be our own worst enemies.
Yep.
And if we're disciplined and goal oriented, you can get out of some pretty deep spots.
My dad used to say, like, anytime that, my brother or I would complain about something or kind of like, oh, the ref or, whatever, he used to say, take responsibility for literally everything that happens to you. Because if you don't take responsibility when things go wrong, one, you can never change them. But two, you also internally will not take responsibility when things go right. And you start becoming a person that things happen to instead of a person that makes things happen. And so I think about that all the time with my kids. And when I say my kids, I mean not only my own children, but the kids I coach. I do not let them make excuses for themselves, but I also don't care what the result of their athletic endeavors are. And I know that sounds weird. My kids have generally been very good at sports. I have a daughter who's an absolute assassin on the wrestling mat. I've got a son that also is kind of following in that footsteps. And my older two sons were very good at the sport. And, I've got a son that's a great fencer of all things. He started fencing his senior year because he wanted something to do that, in a season when he wasn't doing a sport, and, qualified for nationals. So that they've had these journeys and they have done well for the most part, but I want them to succeed for them if they put the work in. But in a weird way, like when they don't put the work in, I don't really want them to get lucky. I want them to learn the lesson of, like, to beat the best people at whatever it is, you have to work harder than they do. So the result doesn't incredibly matter to me, but I do want to make sure that when they get off the mat or they get off the track or they step off the football field, that it's not, if only so-and-so had done whatever, I would have succeeded. Like, nah, you can't. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Kenny Monday's an Olympian that, he coached at UNC for a while. And I had the pleasure of sitting down with him. He was the first black Olympic gold medalist for the USA. And he has a very simple mantra in life, and it's just winners win. That's it. So I find it interesting, and I kind of wanted to, hear a little bit about your journey from not getting into law school to the Supreme Court. I find it very interesting because you've jumped around a lot. So you get into law school, and then you come back and you're in family practice. How do you end up as a DA?
Well, during the course of my work in private practice, I obtained the contract with the local Department of Social Services to do their abuse, neglect, and dependency cases. Those are children who've been abused, problems with parents, and at that point the government steps in. And sometimes those parents are successful in getting their children back or completing plans and that sort of thing. Other times they're not. And so
that's a tough line of work.
Oh, it is. It is. Whether you're representing the department, the parents, or the child in that situation, it's taxing. It's emotionally taxing and difficult work. Absolutely.
How do people end up in those situations? Because to me, I can't imagine anything that is more important than taking care of my kids.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, it has to do with choices, right, and discipline. And unfortunately, we have individuals who have made the choice to not get an education for one reason or another, made the choice to begin using drugs, to sort of drop out of being productive members of society. And those decisions, one by one, catch up with them. And whether it's an unintentional situation where you leave a child with make a bad decision about a poor caretaker, or you make the poor decision yourself, there are a lot of reasons that those sort of things snowball. But unfortunately, tend to end up in a bad spot with the legal system.
You've, I'm sure, seen countless situations where, you've seen iterations of people in front of you as a judge in these bad spots. Are there common threads? Like, can you see, like, in advance where something is heading just because you've seen so many iterations of how people end up in front of you?
There are a couple of things that I would point to. One is domestic violence. Domestic violence is an indicator for failure on a number of levels, whether it's that particular generation or down the line. The other thing is poor education, decisions not to stay in school. We just, especially in rural North Carolina, we still, so I grew up in a mill town, right, where the attitude was I can drop out eighth grade and go to the mill. That's not the situation any longer, but there are a number of people who still see that their grandfather or grandmother were able to do those sorts of things, and think that
they can too.
Just can't do it.
They don't like school, so
yeah. But if you were to go sit in Superior Court one day, the felony court, and just listen to the defense attorneys or the defendants talk about what should happen to them and why, I think one of the common threads is very low education achievement.
Do you think the lack of trade schools nowadays has led to that?
Well, so yes, but in a little bit of a nuanced way. I think we have put so much focus on you have to go to a 4-year school, and we have not emphasized that you can engage in some of these career paths, plumber, welder, those sorts of things, and be not only a productive member of society, but a very wealthy member of society. Those individuals, mechanics, are so in high demand now, and they make good money. But for whatever reason, our schools don't equip our children to go down that path.
Could you talk just a little bit about what your role was in those courts with those domestic courts with the families? Were you defense attorney? Were you a prosecutor? Can you talk just a little bit more about that to Nick?
Yeah, so in the abuse, neglect, and dependency realm, I actually did all 3 roles at one point. When I was when I started out, I was representing parents in just tremendously difficult situations. Also represented parents who were attempting to adopt the children who are in the system. There's a position called guardian ad litem, and the guardian ad litem speaks for the child in the court. So I represented the children at one point, and that was perhaps the most enjoyable role in that court. You're able to talk with the children or talk with individuals about what's best for this child, and you're not dealing with people who may be less than receptive to suggestions about how they should live their life and parent their child. But you're able to have a positive voice for the child. And then I represented the department, which is a role where you are advocating for either removal of the child, some sort of different placement, adoption, and that's a tough role, because at the end of the day, and that's in many respects equivalent to a death penalty type situation for that parent.
But at the same time, I mean, if you're not taking care of your kid, you can't put kids back into a dangerous situation,
right,
over and over again. But it's got to weigh on you, though, because I'm sure there are some where it's like, this is such a no-brainer that you're sleeping like a baby at night because you took the kid out of just the worst situation, and now they at least have safety.
Right.
But I bet there's some that are very gray, where it's like, man, I don't know which way these parents are going to go. Are they actually going to adjust their lives because of this? Or, it's got to be hard. That's hard work. I don't envy you.
It is. No, they're difficult cases. In North Carolina, basically the parents have about a year, for the most part, have about a year to sort of correct path. And if they do, then the results tend to be positive for both the parents and the child. If not, then there are steps that are taken to make sure that child is safe, whether that's adoption placement with a family member or some other measure. But usually if you can't correct for your child in about a year,
that's a lot of time.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm in that court, and we have a particular case that comes through, and I notice there's a disconnect between sort of what I'm seeing and what's being prosecuted. So that sort of differentiation did not make sense to me and some other people, and so that's what led to the decision to run for DA.
Interesting. And so you run for DA, not something that you planned or something that was in the back of your head?
Not planned.
Okay.
In fact, we had encouraged, at the previous election, we'd encouraged someone else to run. And again, one of those situations, nobody steps up, and would seem something that my talents were suited for, and decided to take that step.
So in TV shows, DAs are fast. They're either fast talking, evil guys bent on, political aspirations, or they are the only one that's trying to do the right thing. So which of those two were you?
So no. So I used to do presentations for the DA's conference here. I served as president of the DA's conference, and so I'd have these slideshow presentations that started out with Mr. District Attorney, the comic book from the 30s that was based on the Dewey Defeats Truman.
I did not know that there was a District Attorney comic book.
Yeah, so I would start out the presentation.
Now I need to have it.
Yeah, so it's Thomas Dewey, the famous DA from New York.
Not the Dewey Decimal System guy.
No, not that I'm aware. but I would start off with this poster of Mr. District Attorney slugging some criminal. Yep. And I would start off with, I bet you didn't think you'd see a superhero today, but here I am. So we were very much focused on a couple of different areas. One, child sexual assaults, which is, again, part of the reason that I ran, and was very fortunate to create a staff that was focused on prosecuting those types of crimes. And then reducing gang crime. And I know people are probably wondering, what on earth kind of gang crime would you have in rural North Carolina?
There's gangs everywhere.
Yeah, and the spillover from Greensboro, some other municipalities, would surprise a number of people. But we engaged in a program called Project SAFE with the U.S. Attorney's Office, where we focused on gang members and recidivists. And so those were really the two big things that I was hoping to accomplish while DA.
And how was that role?
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Right. It is good to wear the white hat.
That's not the reaction that I expected. I've never thought of it in that way. So what makes it fun?
Well, at the end of the day, right, you are on the side of protecting innocence. And if you believe in liberty, if you believe in the Constitution, you have a role to play as a prosecutor in preserving liberty. Whether someone is unjustly charged or there's a victim of crime who needs help, at the end of the day, your job is to carry out the law and do justice, and being able to function in that capacity in the courtroom every day is enjoyable. Now, are there headaches with it, just like every other job?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and so it's frustrating at times, or it was frustrating at times when there are arguments over discovery or charging decisions where ultimately the prosecutor has the final say in what gets charged and why. But that was an enjoyable role to be able to play, and I think we helped the community in doing it.
Because that role really sets the precedent for what the fairness of that county is going to have as far as law goes. Right, the district attorney is the person that's really saying, this is what the law is, and we're going to take care of the right people, or we're going to prosecute the wrong people, right?
Absolutely right. And the prosecutor is the only person in the courtroom who's charged with doing justice for the community. And so the community norms at the beginning of the process are set by the prosecutor. And at the end of that process, the people, as the jury, set those norms. And so to be able to again play a role in hopefully improving the area that I grew up, I'm very proud of the work we did.
So you never intended to become a judge.
No.
Talk about how you ended up there.
Failure, right? So a common theme for me, failure is.
It's a common theme for me too. So
Yeah.
it's
So I had a decision to make at the end of my second term as DA. There was a position that opened up where there was an open seat for Congress. Decided to run for that. If you were to believe, say Dewey defeats Truman, if you were to believe everything you read, that's an election I should have won 9 times out of 10. Unfortunately, I was not successful, and that sort of put me in a difficult place where I had to send out resumes to people. I was unemployed, and many people would probably say unemployable as well. But so I had to start looking for a job, and a position came open in Raleigh just at that time as an administrative law judge. And I know your viewers and listeners go, what on earth is an administrative law judge, right? But agency interaction with people. If you're a law enforcement officer, training and standards, so that you can either keep or obtain your certification.
Got it.
If you're trying to open a business, maybe there are some environmental issues that you're facing. So how the government actually interacts with people on a daily basis, and those claims go to an administrative law judge at some point. So I did that for 2 years. Excuse me. I think one of the reasons that I got that job was my work as a prosecutor, not for the results that I had received and we had obtained, but for the skills that I had obtained in being in a courtroom every day. And what they needed from an administrative law judge was someone who could try cases. And I had that ability, just not from the bench, but was able to step in and handle some of the more complicated cases that came through that agency, which was quite a bit of fun to be able to handle and be trusted with those types of cases.
How different is it to be on the other side? So, you've spent at this point your whole career, arguing cases, and now you're deciding cases. How does that feel?
Well, so at first it's a very awesome responsibility. Even though I never wanted to be a judge, it's you still have respect for the position,
Sure.
and judges tend to have a pretty good reputation in the community, and you think, oh wow, that's it's sort of imposter syndrome. I can't believe that I'm stepping into that position.
I assume too, if you're a decent person, you really are trying to do the right thing. It's really weighing heavily on you that you are adjudicating the facts correctly and making good decisions. That has to be a different feeling, because I as an attorney, it's you go in there, you try your best, you put the effort into whatever it is you're arguing, but at some point the responsibility is on the judge or the jury. But now this is a different responsibility.
And I think being an administrative law judge first was important to my development, because again, I had no background in admin law, right? So every case that came, some experience with law enforcement and
Sure.
certification, obviously, but for some of the meatier cases, I had no idea what the law was, right? So to have to
So you have to teach yourself.
at every point.
Yep.
And so without those sort of biases and those backgrounds, I think that probably made me a better judge long term than stepping into a role where, hey, I'm hearing criminal cases all the time.
Yeah.
So I think that was actually beneficial to me. I think it made me a better judge.
I was going to ask, if you don't mind, how hard it is to remove biases when you're having to judge a case and make a decision, if there's a lot of your own personal feelings, or not that you get too involved, but like if you hear something that's really emotional, like you have to step back. Like how hard is that for you?
Well, so I'll give you two answers to that. One, in law school, we're taught to argue both sides, right? So no matter how compelling or how emotional an argument may be, we have sort of a background in how to be objective, right? And
Would you say that you have to adopt a neutral position? Sorry, I had to.
That was really good. I wish I had thought of that. But yeah, so you have this background in arguing both sides, and then the other, I just believe if you cannot separate your personal beliefs from the ability to apply the law, then I think you need better or different judges, right? Judges with agendas are advocates, and they're not judges, and that's one of the problems that we've, or at least people perceive with the judiciary across the nation is they're more advocates now than there used to be.
Do you think that's the case? Because I always wonder. You almost, I hate to say this, but you almost can't take, news reports or news commentary at face value anymore, right? There's a lot of newstainment and a lot less news than there was, a generation ago. So do you believe that there are more advocate judges now, or do you think this is just kind of a hyped up political infighting kind of thing, kind of throwing accusations back and forth?
So I think there is some measure of politicization of the judiciary. I think absolutely. But I think that comes from perhaps a little bit different point of view or a different arena. As government grows and expands and its tentacles sort of get into everything, where do people turn for redress for any grievance? It's the courts. So judges perhaps may not be more political. It's that they are handling more political issues because our government just continues to expand without seemingly any end to it.
I have to ask this because you kind of opened the door to this a little bit, but Merrick Garland, right? When he was not voted on for the Supreme Court, what are your feelings as a judge for that situation? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so there are rules in place that deal with filling vacancies, and my recollection of that situation is those rules were followed, and it's unfortunate for him individually, but in terms of the system and the process worked as it was supposed to. So I think if you're an objective observer, you could always be upset with what took place, but objectively,
objectively, both parties have done it. Both parties have paused on the nomination in order to get their guys in. I just, in general terms, so let's take Merrick Garland out of it. Let's just say that, you think it's appropriate. I'm asking, you think it's appropriate to kind of say, well, we got 3 months. I'm going to pump the brakes and make sure that, we get our guy.
Well, I do, because what is the remedy, right? The remedy lies with the people, right? You can't do anything about that particular nomination or individual.
Yep.
But if the people are upset, and the fount of all power in our system is the people, if the people don't like it, then they have the ability to vote out or vote in members of Congress. So again, process-wise, I have no problem with it.
I agree with that, but I do think, though, given that it is then a lifetime appointment, I think that's where people would argue it. Is that okay? Yeah, you can vote the person out, but the justices stay in. So,
right. Well, and so had you look at it from the other side, is there a significant backlash for the Senate for moving that nomination at that time? Maybe they, ultimately people have to make difficult decisions. With the exception of federal judges, most of us are accountable to the people, and those decisions have consequences. And that's sort of the genius of our system, that ultimately the people are in charge.
Imagine a media agency that can make a documentary that qualifies for Academy Award voting. Imagine another that created a Billboard charting music video for Five for Fighting. Imagine another that has raised so much money for nonprofits in its first year working on the Classy.org platform that at the end of the year, it was named as only the second marketing partner in Classy's history. Imagine another firm that can cover your events anywhere on planet Earth and provide a compelling series of videos about those events immediately and to your needs. And imagine another still that can help your e-commerce business take it to the next level. Now imagine that they're all the same business, Diesel Jack Media. Some of you might be saying, hey, Nick, isn't that your company? And to that I answer, can a company like Diesel Jack Media really be owned? Or can it merely be coaxed out like a beautiful butterfly on a spring day? As you listen to this podcast that, by the way, Diesel Jack Media created, you may be asking yourself, what's our secret? It's simple. We try not to suck. Sounds easy, right? It should be, but somehow marketing companies and media agencies always seem to get it wrong. You see, we don't make PowerPoints about doing work. We do the work because we like the work. And if one of our ideas doesn't work, you know what we do? We try another one again and again and again until our ideas start to work. Because not quitting until it's right is at the heart of not sucking. And as previously mentioned, that's what we try not to do here. Diesel Jack Media. We try not to suck. Visit us at dieseljackmedia.com. That is dieseljackmedia.com. So taking a step back before we go to, becoming an appeals judge, why'd you want to run for Congress?
I thought I could contribute. I have a great deal of respect for people who put themselves in front of the public and declare positions and then have to defend those positions. Mm-hmm. I think doing that at the federal level is very appealing, or at least was very appealing, because ultimately your tool, what you are using to help people, is and should be the Constitution. I like to think that I have at least some knowledge of the Constitution, and I thought that I could do some things to halt the growth of government and protect rights. But the good thing about the way things work out is now I get to use the Constitution every day to protect rights. And so, again, we all think that we're cut out for certain things, and the people get the final say.
Would you ever run again?
No.
Like 100%? No desire?
Not at all. And so one of the reasons is quality of life. I have no interest in trying to raise $50,000 a month or $80,000, whatever that figure is, and my phone ringing off the hook 24 hours a day every 2 years. I have an 8-year term here in North Carolina. Our Supreme Court justices serve for 8 years, and it's one where I can really focus on the Constitution and the law, and be an advocate for rights, mm-hmm. without just destroying my family to do it.
I absolutely understand that. You talked. You've mentioned a few times about the growth of government, the degradation of rights. Do you believe that to be a real threat? And how do you see that coming to fruition?
Well, nationally, absolutely. That as government grows, your rights decrease. Sure. I mean, that's fundamental and proven throughout history. One of the exciting things on the state level, and something that people don't consider often, is there is a state constitution that is often a little more robust in the protection of individual rights, such that government may not be as intrusive or cannot be as intrusive as the federal government. And serving as a state Supreme Court justice, being able to use that tool that has been in existence since 1776 here in North Carolina, to help people fight for individual liberty, fight for economic liberty, and do it in a way that is consistent with the Constitution. That's just very exciting to me.
How does, I'm not an expert in this regard, how does the North Carolina Constitution protect rights perhaps, more deeply than the U.S. Constitution?
Well, just one example, right? So in the federal Constitution, we have that your rights to life, liberty, and property are expressly protected. In North Carolina, we have a little bit of a different take on that. That your life, liberty, and the fruits of your own labor are protected. So what are the fruits of your own labor? And I think if you have to go back to John Locke, I think, to get a real appreciation of what that means, right? So it's not only, I get to go to work and do these sorts of things. There are cases in North Carolina that say it's the work you put in and the growth you get from that work that you're entitled to without government interference. And so again, I think you could probably argue that property, as the founding fathers of the federal Constitution intended, would encapsulate that. But in terms of an express protection of the fruits of your own labor, those are the types of rights that are here in North Carolina and a couple other constitutions. That it's just a rich area to protect people.
That's really interesting to me. Like you typically, as a layman, I typically think of the U.S. Constitution as being the arbiter of, individual liberty, and you don't typically think of the states as supplying additional liberty. So that's an interesting perspective. Which states do you think are leading the charge in terms of individual liberty, and which states do you think are, just two or one or two of each that are maybe doubling down on the direction of the federal government?
Well, I think objectively, and without going into any legal issues, there are a number of people who are moving to Florida now, and I think that has a lot to do with liberty interest. And there are a number of people who are moving not only to North Carolina but Texas in fairly equal numbers. But I think Texas is a little bit ahead of us. But in terms of our court, I think we have a court that is protective of individual rights. And it's something that should attract the business community, and because you've got certainty and dependability, and you can, if you're going to expand a business, do you want to go to an area where there's certainty in the law, or do you want to go to an area where perhaps there's potential for upheaval? And so Florida, North Carolina, Texas, and you just look at the U-Haul information about who's moving out, and that gives you an idea of sort of where rights may not be viewed as protected as much.
Yeah. he doesn't want to say it. I do, just because this is never an easy topic, but we talked about it recently on a show, and I wanted to bring this up to you because it was a question that was posed to me. So on the abortion issue, individual rights in that regard in Texas and now potentially in North Carolina are, it's a discussion point. And so, where do you see, from a legal standing, I'm not asking, for personal opinion unless you want to get into that, but from a legal standpoint, how do you adjudicate that? So if we are providing individual rights in terms of property and speech and the Second Amendment and so forth, but this is on the table, a constant sore in the side of America.
So I'm going to give you a politician's answer to this one, okay? And I apologize.
I'm ready.
So we have the Code of Judicial Conduct here in North Carolina that says we cannot basically stake ourselves out on a case that or issue that might come before the court.
Got it.
So because of the Dobbs decision that pushed those issues down to the states, there's the potential that issue could come before me, so I can't speak on anything abortion related.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, I appreciate it. I had to ask. I think Quiggs here would have been upset with me if I hadn't asked. So that in general terms probably makes it very hard to have a number of discussions. So you have to be very guarded in, all kinds of discussions when you're having anything. Now, is that true for private discussion as well?
Depend, right? I mean, we all have sort of individual discussions with people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you can
doors.
speak to your family about how you feel on different topics, but if you're in a business setting with a group of 12 people, can you have those conversations, or you have to keep it to yourself?
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, but it does make it interesting when you have to campaign. Again, in North Carolina, we stand for election. We have to go in front of the voters, and judicial campaigns are as boring as you can ever. I will be fair. I will follow the law, and I believe in the Constitution. I mean, everybody has those sort of three things down.
And there have to be, going back to what Julia was asking you before, if you are an impartial judge, there have to be times where you don't like the law, but you have to rule in accordance with it. How do you deal with that?
It's tough, and I can give you a concrete example of that, and it's one that you may be personally familiar with. There was a special needs charter school here in North Carolina, and prior to becoming an administrative law judge, my son went to a charter school. I was active in the charter school movement, but we had so charter schools get their ability to operate from the state of North Carolina. In that operation, there are certain benchmarks and hurdles that they have to meet or clear, and if they don't, then they get placed on a sort of probation. Well, this particular charter school was chartered to meet special needs children's needs. And unfortunately, the administration did not take the steps necessary to clear some of the hurdles, and the state moved in to shut the school down. That case came to me as an administrative law judge, and had to hear it. And it's very difficult because just from a special needs children's perspective, if you disrupt their daily activity, their daily life, some of these kids have been in school for 3, 4, 5 years, that's something that weighed on me heavily. If this school gets shut down, these children are just going to be a tremendous amount of upheaval. But at the same time, the law was very clear that if that school did not meet these benchmarks, then the state had to step in and shut them down. So ultimately, that's the decision I made, consistent with the law and the facts of the case. But it's one that bothers me to this day, and that was 8 years ago. I mean, it's tough, but and over the course of a career, you sort of get used to making decisions and moving on, and that's one I would not do differently, but I wish I could have done differently.
Totally understand. Totally understand that. All right, you become an appeals court judge, which you did not anticipate,
right?
And talk about that transition and what the difference is from the administration judge to the appeals judge, and how you have to think about that differently.
Well, we had about November of 2015, somebody who was running for the Court of Appeals dropped out, and the filing period was in December, very, very short turnaround period. I started getting phone calls saying, hey, you really should look at this from a number of people, and told them no. I was not interested in running for office again, didn't want to be on a ballot, those sorts of things. Still an open wound from the congressional race. And
you were wallowing.
I was I was not in the best frame of mind and wallowing a little bit, yeah. But eventually people convinced me to do it, and it was a good decision. Again, I think my experience in private practice as a DA, all of those sort of build on each other, and then becoming an administrative law judge, you don't see it at the time, but it opened a number of doors and a pathway that I never expected.
So talk about the challenges of being, an appeals judge. I mean, that's a different. Now you're really getting into nuance, correct? I mean, again, I'm a layman, but you're assessing the quality of decisions from other judges, and I'm sure some people take that personally. So talk about the challenges of that job.
Well, so the difficulty for me is it was my background, right? So I come from, I'm going to argue in court. The law is pretty clear on the positions that I'm arguing. I've got this whole new body of law as an administrative law judge, but now I've got to really understand the law and be able to explain it, right? Because if you're in a courtroom, you can make an argument or ruling and just sort of move on. But here you have to sort of show your work, and that for me, at least initially, was difficult. Coming from a background where we didn't have to write a lot. Again, we just argue in court.
Sure.
So that transition was not very smooth, but it's very much like law school. And so if you can go to law school and
do you need to put out a written opinion for literally every case?
We do.
And do you have clerks and whatnot that help with that the way the Supreme Court does, or not really?
We do. So at both the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals, we have 2 law clerks and an administrative assistant. And the law clerks are just so important in helping us draft opinions, understand the arguments of the parties. My law clerks made the transition much easier than it would have been otherwise.
Talk a little bit about, and I don't know if you're allowed to or not again, but what was one of the more challenging cases you had to work on, and how much time goes into developing that opinion?
So one of the more challenging opinions at the Court of Appeals was a homicide case that had occurred 15, 16 years prior. And the case had gone up and down. So just trying to imagine the record, right? All of the information that had been generated from the trial court and the appeals courts on that case, just trying to handle the record on something like that's very difficult. But there was a situation in this particular case where it had come back because someone had claimed there was newly discovered evidence, right? And there were affidavits and testimony dealing with this newly discovered evidence that didn't quite fit with what the record was. So over the course of probably about 6 months, I went through every bit of that record, every bit of testimony, every bit of the affidavits that were submitted, and wrote an opinion that probably about 60 pages as to why this didn't qualify under the law as newly discovered evidence. I realize that that's a very specific example, but it's one that I think is important because it would have been easy to just go, oh, this is newly discovered evidence, and toss it aside and said, oh, go right ahead. But because both myself and my clerks sat down and really understood what had taken place, it was easy to point out some of the flaws in the trial court's decision below, and in doing that, at least in the short term, we were able to, right. So on the other side of every homicide case, there's a victim and a victim's family. Right, and so we were at the very least able to let the victim's family know that, look, somebody's looking at this, and I'm very, very proud of that.
So then, how do you go from the appeals court to the Supreme Court of North Carolina?
Again, just sort of by accident. The Chief Justice.
I need to start having your kind of accidents. My accidents are like I fell down the stairs and like shattered a knee or something. Your accidents are like, I'm a justice in the Supreme Court. Like those are good accidents.
Yeah. Well, and again, I'm the guy from rural North Carolina who just is lucky enough that the people said, hey, we trust you with this, and I think that's an important perspective. You get a lot of people who get elected to office, and it is, oh, look at me, I am fill in the blank position.
Yep.
I'm the guy from rural North Carolina who gets to walk by the George Washington statue every day on the Capitol grounds. And the only reason this happened was, again, it was luck or accident. The individual who was serving as Chief Justice at the time decided he wanted to take a position as law school dean. So that vacancy led to sort of musical chairs on the Supreme Court. And there was a position that was open that we needed somebody to run. And this is, so again, this is 2019-ish, end of 2018. And so the prospects at that time, this was not going to be a good year for Republicans. I'm conservative Republican. We run partisan elections here. And again, it was, hey, you really ought to look at this. And it seemed at the time as a fool's errand, right? Just polling and all those sorts of things. Well, as eventually said yes and jumped into that process. And, I think I have an ability to communicate the more conservative judicial philosophy than some others may. And again, that's a talent that people saw in me.
I think there is a disconnect. People really don't understand the difference between being a conservative judge and being a conservative politician. These are not the same things.
No.
Can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a conservative justice? Because I think it'd be helpful for people to hear it, at least from your perspective.
Right. So I think that has to do more with judicial philosophy, right? And judicial philosophy now, at least in today's age, tends to fall on two ends of the spectrum. One is the living document interpretive theory, and the other is sort of originalism and textualism. And if you were to look, I believe the more conservative individuals who are more conservative are tied to tradition of the court, original meaning of the Constitution, and fidelity to the statutes that are passed by the General Assembly, right? So those individuals who have that sort of worldview or judicial philosophy tend to be seen as conservative, whereas interpretive theory or living document interpretive theory is the Constitution is a living document, and it changes with the times. So it can mean today whatever I think it should mean, and tomorrow could mean something completely different. And so those tend to be, at least in the legal world, viewed as more liberal judges.
So, in layman's terms, a conservative justice is one who believes the Constitution should be generally interpreted the way that the framers wrote it and their meaning at the time. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And just, for those of you out there, like it just is not the same thing as saying someone is a Republican or Democrat. It is, I was a big fan of. I'm weird. I used to read. I still read a lot of Supreme Court decisions just because I like to see the structure of the argument. But I was a big fan of the way Scalia structured a number of his arguments, just because, like, you could tell sometimes he, as a human being, did not agree with something, but really did stay to what he felt was the meaning of the Constitution. I found his relationship with Justice Ginsburg to be interesting too, because they had such an appreciation for each other, but came at things from a completely different perspective. And it wasn't this. It sometimes feels that way, but it is not the same thing as I am a Republican politician or I'm a Democrat politician. This is the way that I view the Constitution and how, I find it interesting. So I appreciate you explaining that to those of us that are not in the area. I do have the most important question to ask you, though. What is the best law show of all time?
Man, that was my question.
Well,
I was going to ask if you watch Law and Order SVU at all.
What in your opinion is the best law show that has ever been created?
So it's got to be Magnum PI.
Yes.
No, so we used to watch Law and Order every night. My wife and I, when we were up in Michigan, and so that's a very good show. Very pretty realistic, and in terms of the law, pretty accurate. There's some liberty. It'd be nice to be able to do all of that in 60 minutes, right?
Yeah.
But you know, I don't watch any of that anymore. But if Magnum PI, the old ones, are on, there's Tom Selleck.
That show holds up. It really does. It holds up. You know, I remember it as a kid, Magnum PI being campy. I always thought, it was a campy, fun show. But now watching it as an adult, you realize it was really heavy. Like, he was fun and silly, but I mean, you know, he was covering post-traumatic stress when no one was talking about post-traumatic stress and issues of Vietnam, and I mean, all kinds of like really deep stuff that, you know, no one else had. I was going to say my favorite was Boston Legal. That was my favorite. I don't know if you ever watched that show. That was with William Shatner and James Spader.
It seems like I've heard of it, but I don't remember watching it.
I'm gonna get it for you. I'm gonna send it. I'm gonna send it so you can assess from a legal perspective. I think probably legally it's not great, but it was a great film.
So there's a good one. If you've got an hour and a half to kill, it's called Star Chamber. And it's Kirk Douglas.
Great movie.
So this is what mid 80s, somewhere in there.
Late 70s.
Did you work on that movie?
No. I was just in America back then. It's about a group of judges, right?
Yeah, so the group of judges look around and they see these people getting off on technicalities, and you know, in their opinion, justice is not being done. So they get together and they hire hitmen to go out and
oh man.
So that's
is that the direction you're heading?
No, not at all. But it's a good movie. And one of the interesting things is if you were to watch it today, and then just think about the law that's being applied back then versus where the law is now.
Yeah.
There's some very stark contrast in what is permissible now versus what was not permissible then.
How so?
So there's one scene where they go through the suspect's trash, right, and it gets tossed out because the cops didn't get a warrant for the trash can, right? And so now the law in that area is different. But there are a couple of little nuances to the law that you go, oh, that's changed a little bit.
Interesting.
Mike Douglas, right?
Yeah. Yep.
What about L.A. Law? You remember that show?
I did. That was a little bit before my time. I think I was middle school-ish.
Remember L.A. Law?
I do.
Did you work L.A. Law?
I did not. I worked at Arrest and Trial.
I'm just checking.
Wolf's reenactment version of Law and Order.
Brian Dennehy.
Welcome to Arrest and Trial.
All right. So before we go into our rapid fire question round, which you get like 10 seconds to, rapidly answer questions that are not very serious. Is there anything that you wish I would have asked you that I did not ask you?
The Check the Box initiative.
Oh my God. How did I? Yeah. We literally were talking about that before. Yeah. I have failed you. I have failed you. I have failed America. No. So, you have been involved in the Veterans Justice Initiative. And one of the things that, many people have said that you played a huge impact on was the Check the Box initiative. Can you talk about what that is and the effect that it's had?
I was listening to a podcast one day, and Clark Pennington with the Independence Fund was on talking about some work he had done in Buncombe County with a Veterans Treatment Court. And essentially, the Independence Fund provides pre-sentencing reports for veterans who are charged with crime in that community. And it just hit me, why don't we identify the veterans who are coming through the legal system, who've been charged with crime, who are asking for court-appointed counsel, and try to direct them to services through the Independence Fund. It is not a heavy lift. We are currently in the process of negotiating with the administrative office of the courts, basically supervisory agency over the court system, to include this box. We've had a number of meetings where I was previously engaged in military service, and by checking that box, that triggers communication with the Independence Fund so that they can provide these pre-sentencing reports, not just in one or two counties, but for veterans across the state. Because we have 5 veteran treatment courts here in North Carolina, and if we can expand this at little to no cost to the taxpayers, it serves to provide a huge benefit, not only in the legal realm, right? Because you have a judge or a prosecutor that gets this sentencing report that gives details about background, criminal history. Are they going to the VA for their benefits? Do they have their medication fixed? That information that would be critical to structuring probation, or maybe even a veterans deferral program with the DA's office so they don't get a criminal conviction. So that's sort of the genesis of this, and it appears to have a good possibility of moving forward. Very proud of it.
What motivated you to do that? Why are you so engaged with this project and with, the Independence Fund, and why did you reach out and try to, solve this problem?
Just an accident. I saw an area that perhaps there was a need. I reached out to one of the individuals with that podcast and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And he said, "Move forward. That sounds like a great idea." And so from there, it's just multiplication of resources and manpower. North Carolina is a very good destination for veterans. So we are a veteran-friendly state, and you see that in the legislature. You've seen it with the help we've gotten from the court system and other judges with this Check the Box initiative, and the public certainly wants to. For people in North Carolina, it's a no-brainer.
North Carolina also seems to have, seems to have a very functional legislature. It's not a legislature that is, like the federal government, Congress. Republicans are always going to vote one way, and Democrats are always going to vote one way. And if anybody breaks ranks, it's like a knockout, drag out. They're getting made fun of, dragged. They're on the news. North Carolina seems very reasonable. Like if there's a problem, everyone seems to want to solve it. Now they might come at it from different ways, but I've seen time and time again bipartisan solutions to lots of problems in North Carolina. But with the Veterans Justice Initiative, you had 100% unanimous voting to put that initiative in place. And it seems like the same support is being garnered towards this initiative. Do you think that's unique to North Carolina, or why do you think it works here where it doesn't seem to work on the federal level and, and in other states?
Well, just the military presence that we have here with Fort Bragg, Camp Lejeune, Cherry Point, Seymour Johnson. I mean, a number of military installations here, and the veterans are part of the community. And tend to take on leadership roles, whether they run for office or active in boards and organizations. So I think we have, at least in North Carolina, the North Carolina I know, a very deep appreciation for the sacrifices that our military personnel have made for us. And most of us are related to a veteran in some way, shape, or fashion. And again, it was just, it's, When I heard Clark talk about this, it seemed like an easy solution to help a number of people who really need it. I think it's tragic that we have the veteran suicide rate that we do, and if you listen to some of the more modern or updated numbers, it's closer to about 25 than the 22. And I think that's a problem we can solve if we get in early, not solve completely, right, but address. If we can get in early when people get hooked on drugs or make some very poor decisions and wind up in the criminal justice system, and they see this as another situation where there's no way out. Well, the Independence Fund seems to have done a really good job in these small pockets. Let's see if we can take it to a broader audience and make it work.
That's awesome. And I appreciate your contribution, towards this endeavor. So thank you very much for that.
I'm like I said, I'm very proud of this, have a passion for it, and hopefully things continue to progress.
And then, I have to call out that you are currently drinking coffee out of a charter member Range 15 account. So the only way to get this mug is having donated to Range 15. These were never sold, and so you grabbed one and decided to drink out of that instead of a more generic, either a Diesel Jack Media mug or, I'm going generic today. You are, I believe, the first guest to come on the show that has actually watched Range 15. And I specifically have had to promise to Sarah Verardo that I will not show people Range 15. She's never watched it, but she just has a assumption that it's terrible, which is not a poor assumption.
What's your favorite part of Range 15? Do you remember?
Yeah, probably shouldn't answer that question.
How do you lose a position?
The views of this program do not necessarily reflect the judge's views.
It is a very colorful movie. I have a twisted sense of humor, probably from just having my head in books and paper all day. But no, it's I like comedy, right? And I don't know if that necessarily qualifies as comedy or what, but yeah, I'm a big fan of those guys.
Can you quickly just tell us how the check the box thing works? A veteran gets arrested. How does the whole process happen? Is it on a arrest form? Is it on some other kind of form? You mind just telling us that?
So with the check the box initiative, when an individual is charged with a crime and they go to court, most people fill out an affidavit of indigency to try to obtain a court-appointed attorney. And that is where this box would be located. Now, will it capture every veteran that goes to court? No. Traffic offenses would not qualify.
Sure.
Some other things. But if you're charged with
something
serious crime, we want to be able to identify that individual and hopefully get them triggered with services, because that's the contact point where people first admit they need help, right? You can be arrested by a law enforcement officer and jump up and down and protest, and this isn't fair. But when you get to court and the judge says, "I need you to fill out this affidavit," that's the first time where anybody, if you confess to a crime, right? But that's the first time where anybody is really saying, right, I'm going to need some help to get through this process.
Got it.
And that's a good point for a veteran to go, I'm a veteran. They don't necessarily know what the second part of that is, but it's a cry out point essentially.
That's great. All right. With that, let me ask you, is there anything else that I should have asked you that I have not asked you at this time?
No, I don't think so.
You good? I didn't drop any other balls, because I take full responsibility for not asking about the Check the Box initiative, because we talked about that, and I definitely wanted to bring that up. Are you ready to Julius Caesar your morning? Warpath Coffee is just for you then. No matter if your morning consists of fighting Blackbeard's crew, squaring off with the alien from Alien, defending Gotham, or maybe just going to work as an accountant, Warpath Coffee has you covered. Creating the best gourmet coffee is what they do. So why settle for anything less than that? Did I mention that all orders over $60 in the U.S. come with free shipping? Well, I guess I just did. Ha ha! Mention it, and I'm glad I did, because if you do the math on this, you could order your entire year's worth of coffee and not have to pay for shipping. I'm just saying. Visit warpath.coffee. All right, with that, Quigley.
I had to toss out my law TV show question. There you go.
I'm so sorry that you weren't fast enough with your question. All right, the first question I always ask someone, and keep in mind that, the youth sports teams that you coach are probably listening. What is the toughest animal that you could defeat in hand-to-hand combat?
Dog.
A dog?
Dog.
Any particular kind of dog? You want to get specific?
My yellow lab.
Yellow lab. Okay, that's a reasonable. We've had everything from can't defeat a house cat to we had one guest that thought they could take a lion. So,
Yeah, good luck.
So I think that was a reasonable answer, right?
It was reasonable, and he did it within 10 seconds.
Yeah, it was quick. All right, here we go. What do we got? All right. Since you studied, I never know what these are, by the way. These come from the team. Since you studied history in college, what major historical event are you most passionate about?
The creation of beer by the Egyptians and the perfection by the monks.
You want to just cut it right there? All right. What is your go-to karaoke song?
Beer in Mexico by Kenny Chesney.
All right. The follow-up is we need 10 seconds of you singing.
Oh my gosh. Really? Well, I'll just sit right here and have another beer in Mexico.
You gotta sing it.
You got to sing it. Come on, let's do this.
Well, I'll just sit right here and have another beer in Mexico.
You're gonna cut them at 3 seconds. All right. All right. It was good. It was good. It was good. It's all right. If you were supreme leader for a day, right? So for one day and one day only, you get to enact any change in this country that you want, and it sticks after you are no longer supreme leader. What is that change that you're making?
Detroit Tigers are perpetual world champions.
Well, all the Detroit fans are going to love.
You guys embrace Detroit.
Let me tell you, going to Old Tiger Stadium and sitting in the bleachers was a lot of fun.
All right, I know based on our conversations thus far, you're probably not going to want to answer this, but I implore you to answer. What law school is the most overrated?
Oh my gosh. Seriously, I can't answer that. We had a judge who, no, seriously, we had a judge who made a comment complimenting a particular law school, and got reprimanded because you're not supposed to play favorites.
Right, Quigley, which one do you think is the most overrated?
Yale.
All right, there we go. Quigley says Yale. All right, what has been the best age that you've lived thus far?
50.
How come?
Better shape than I've ever been in my life, and just the experiences I had during that year were a lot of fun. I have a kid that's a senior in college, one that went on to as a freshman in college, and just that transition period as a parent. It's been a good year.
What's a case that you've had that's so wild that it could have been a TV show?
So we had. I can only tell part of this. We had these two individuals break into a mausoleum and engage in sexual intercourse, and that's as far as I can tell because there are some other details.
All right, we don't need the other details. All right. Who would play you in the movie of that case?
Paul Giamatti.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Hey, that's a good one. If you weren't in the law, what job would you have? What job would you have that you think you'd love?
Baseball coach. I wish I had pursued that perhaps a little bit differently.
All right, last one. What would your younger self think of who you are today?
Completely shocked and amazed.
Awesome. With that, Justice Phil Berger, thank you so much for being on. Really appreciate all of your insight, sharing your journey with us, and letting us know how this whole crazy court system works. And it sounds like a lot of work. I would much rather be asking you questions about it than doing it. And I'm going to get you a copy of Boston Legal so that you can assess it, so that we know, is it the best law show of all time? I say yes. Thanks so much.
No, thank you, Nick. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.